Thank you for checking out this episode of Wiregrass Daily News Sports. You can find the podcast over at wiregrassdailynews.com or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please follow, rate, and leave a review, and I will read it on a future edition of the show. And if you just leave 4 stars, you are just a straight up hater. You can follow me on social media over at pjordansec. You can email me at sportstalkphillipjordan@gmail.com. What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Thursday edition of Wiregrass Daily News Sports. I am your host, Phillip Jordan, in-studio host and producer of the Woods Football on 96.9, the legend and Auburn writer for Last Word on college football. It is Thursday. We have a big game tonight locally here in college football. Of course, the Dothan Wolves are playing on Thursday night too. So while you're listening to the Dothan Wolves, if you're at home, if you're not at Repute Stadium, mute the TV, listen to 96.9, Jerry Coleman, Ken Lambert, and myself bring you all the action between Dothan and Jack High School, but also watch tonight's big game between South Alabama and Troy, nationally televised, 6:30 kickoff. And I had to reach out to somebody to talk about this game, preview this game, and talk all things Sunbelt. And joining me right now on the show is David Schultz. He is the host of Sports Chat from 3 to 6 Central Time on 103.3 The GOAT. You can also listen to him every single day and watch him on YouTube as well on the Locked On Sunbelt podcast. And Dave, I appreciate you coming on the show and talking all things Sunbelt and the Troy Trojans with us today.
I appreciate it, Phillip. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, yeah, it's always good to talk to you. You're my go-to guy when it comes to all things Sunbelt. Anything going on in the state of Louisiana, you've got it covered, especially there in Lafayette. And just, this whole season, I guess I want to start off with that, just the Sunbelt overall. Has anything surprised you this season?
ODU is probably one of them. ODU's played really well. Probably, I think it surprised everybody. Their over-under wins was like 1.5 to 2. And they're in the Sunbelt race. And then South Alabama, they may be one of the biggest disappointments in the country. They were supposed to be Tulane. They were supposed to be JMU. And they're a very average football team. In fact, they're probably below average, right? Because they don't have all these close wins. It's one thing, like the Vikings got a bunch of close wins last year, and then they had a bunch of close losses this year. Well, when South Alabama loses, they're getting hammered. They're getting hammered by Tulane. They're getting hammered by the Cajuns. They they get out to a quick start against Central Michigan. That was a close loss, but it was an embarrassing loss. I still don't know what's wrong with them per se. So, I don't think this is going to be much of a battle for the belt, is what I'm trying to tell you.
Well, no, I'm in the Wiregrass area, so a lot of Troy fans here, they'll be happy to hear you saying that. Right. Yeah, and I guess, the whole thing, too, with James Madison, once again, they can't play in the championship game. They would be the front runner to host it, and they are the best team in the league this year, and they got to be looking over there at Troy. So, man, Troy's going to get to host this thing again. We beat Troy. You got to think if that is the case at the end of the year and James Madison keeps their record as it is, they're going to have like, hey, y'all won it, but we had a better record and we beat y'all.
Sure, they can do that. I happen to think right now that Troy is the best team in the Sun Belt. I know they have a couple losses and JMU doesn't. One played K-State and one played Virginia, so that's not exactly even. And I know JMU beat Troy, and I think that game was in Troy. Mm-hmm. So they slipped right past them. That was game 3 of the season. All right, I think Troy has given up like 23 points in the last 4 games combined. Their defense is spectacular, and all of a sudden Gunnar Watson is throwing for like 400 yards. And then you throw in Kamani Vidal, and, all of a sudden Troy has an offense that matches the defense. So I happen to think Troy is the best team right now. Unfortunately for JMU, they knew what they got into when they signed a 2-year transition period. They only care about it now is because, well, they're undefeated. If they were in South Alabama shoes and they were 4-4, no one would care, right? They wouldn't care. And it should be noted, according to Shane Metlin, the beat writer for the newspaper there in Harrisonburg, covering the team, it's everybody else who's going to bat. As far as JMU cares, this is settled. They signed the 2-year transition. They asked for a waiver. They were denied. This was like back in June. This is over the summer. The waiver was denied, Everybody else is just doing it to try and get involved, right? One of the JMU podcasts had the Virginia Attorney General on. You got some other state senators and, representatives trying to get in on the action as well. So everybody else is fighting for JMU except JMU. It's kind of settled in their mind. And, we have this saying here in Louisiana, probably everywhere, it is what it is. It stinks for the players, but it's not like this is a surprise. It's not like anything changed. They knew what they were getting into a couple of years ago. It stinks. I don't like the rule. I think it's a stupid rule, but it's not like anything changed based on what has happened over the last couple of years. The only thing that would change would be for the positive, not for the negative. You're right. They probably upset, with Troy hosting again. JMU let Coastal Carolina know how they felt about them last year. They destroyed them, and then Troy destroyed Coastal Carolina. So we'll see how it wraps up. JMU's got a big ball game this week against Georgia State. See how they rebound after their tough loss to Georgia Southern. But right now, I have Troy as the best team in the Sun Belt. They're playing the best in the Sun Belt. They destroyed Texas State on the road. JMU slipped by ODU last weekend.
Yeah, and talking about, teams when they transition, I believe Appalachian State went through the same thing. I think they had like the best record or one of the best records, and, they were kind of in the same boat too. I mean, I think that was before you had the Sun Belt Championship game, but I think App State, or it was either App State or Georgia Southern when they made their transition.
I think they both did it, yeah. Yeah, I don't know the history as well as I should, but that's correct. Teams had to wait. I think the difference is that JMU has played for the last 2 years a full FBS schedule. So this is what I was told by people. Someone who was asking about this in years past. They don't want teams, going up to FBS, recruiting at FBS level, and then coming back down to FCS. And I'm thinking, if I can figure out how to prevent that, why can't anybody else, right? First of all, if you go to FBS level, you have to stay for 10 years, right? And then if you go back to FCS, because that's the decision you've made, you ain't coming back. Just know that. There is no waiver. There's no, we screwed up. No. And it doesn't matter if a new president or new AD, they knew very well what the deal is. And so you can prevent, trying to go up and down the way I guess the NCAA thinks that may happen. But I'm not sure how many teams have actually done that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's impressive what they've done, and I really didn't intend to go down that rabbit hole, but I'm kind of glad we did. It's always great to have these conversations. You have what you wrote down, you know what you're going to talk about, but then other stuff pop up, you got to discuss it.
Sure.
South Alabama and Troy, and you got to see South Alabama, of course, returning. You were in Mobile for a few years there covering this team. Now back in Lafayette covering the Raging Cajuns. I was kind of surprised keeping up with scores on Saturday, 33-20. Louisiana won. Not that Louisiana won the game, but just the turnovers and just the bad play by South Alabama. What did you see, from both squads on Saturday?
South Alabama did absolutely lose that ball game. It was more of the same from South Alabama. They got punched in the mouth when they missed on a 4th and 1, and they didn't score at all in the first half. Right? This is a team that put up 110 points in 2 ball games, and there's been games all year, whether it's college or pro, Phillip, that I'm wondering is the team we're seeing that good, or is the other team that bad? And in this case, the opponents for South Alabama were Arkansas State and Southern Miss, and they were that bad. Or maybe it was ULM. I'm sorry. It was ULM and Southern Miss. And they were that bad because there's no way. I mean, the Cajuns are good, but they're beat up on defense. They should not have won that game the way they did. It was 17-0 going into half, and South Alabama didn't do anything except that one drive in the first half that they got stopped on a 4th and 1. Now they come up and score quickly twice in the second half, so good for them for coming out. But they let the Cajuns get away with like a 3rd and 10. Right, so there were 5 turnovers and 5 sacks and the big 4th down stop. But the big play in the game was a 3rd down and 10 completion to the tight end that he caught. He probably caught it for 4 yards and ran for 10. Like there's no one covering him. So 2 plays later, Jacob Caboti runs for 56 yards. If you cut down the tight end and it's a 20-14 Cajuns lead, South Alabama could score a touchdown for the third straight possession, and now it's 21-20. Now you have a football game. Instead, it gets to be 26-14. Cajuns went for two for some reason. And then there was the sack and turnover again, the scoop and the score. So you went from the Cajuns up 20-14, facing 3rd and 10, and up by 6, to then all of a sudden, I don't even know if it was 6 plays later, total. 33-14, and that was the end of the ball game. Cajuns looked really good. South looked like they've kind of looked like all year. They I don't know if they weren't into it or they feel the pressure of the expectations and they fall behind. And now Carter Bradley may be hurt. We'll see. Kane Womack not a lot, going to say anything before he has to, but he got hurt on a foolish 2-point play at the end of the ball game. He tweaked the knee, so he had to get help coming off the field. So. I think Troy, I don't think this game is going to be close. Watch the line. The line was 6. It went down to 5.5. I've seen it 5 in places. But if that line jumps, it might mean that Carter Bradley's not playing. So pay attention to the line if you're interested, although in that state you can't really do anything about it yet.
No. You can't do that. You know all about that. You talk about Troy. Yeah, defensively, I think a lot of people coming into this year were thinking, okay, are they going to take a step back? Carter Marshall's not there. And he's not the only top talent they lost from last season, but, he's the headliner for what he did with his career. But like you said, you brought it up, the amount of points that Troy has given up. 7 against Georgia State. That's a team with a really good quarterback, Darren Granger, good running back, too. Arkansas State was feeling pretty good about themselves, I think, coming into that game, only 3 points. Army 0. Then Texas State last week was one of the better offenses. I know leading passer, I think, or T.J. Finley was high up there at least. They stifled them. They scored on the opening drive, and then after that, they kicked 2 field goals. I know Coach John Summerall said it was a bend but don't break, and we bent a little bit too much, but they never broke much in the game. But what's been your takeaway just watching this Troy defense this year?
Well, it has improved. All right, they definitely struggled to begin with. Right, replacing Carlton Marshall is a big deal. Right, you can talk about all the experience that guys have had because he would get banged up every now and then and not play, so they had experience. They're still not Carlton Marshall, right? Mm-hmm. And so Troy, I think Troy gave up one 30-point game last year, and that was on the Hail Mary against App. They did not allow another team to score 30. They gave up 30 or more in the first 2 ball games of the season. One was against Stephen F. Austin, I think, and the other was K-State. Again, no shame with K-State, but that's not the Troy that we've known. They turned it around in a loss against JMU. Holding Western Kentucky to 24 is actually pretty good, and then the defense has been really good. So they have figured things out. You can see the improvement as the season has gone on. That's why I don't think this game is going to be very close. I think Troy is a better defense than the Cajuns. Last year, South Alabama scored a total of 6 points against Troy's defense, and that was at home. I think it's going to be. I'm not sure this game's going to be very close. Like I said when I started.
Yeah, and the thing was with Troy this year, last year that was a 10-6 game, and that was kind of like during at least a regular season. It was the case a lot of times with Troy. The defense plays great. The offense might do just enough or make a few plays in the second half to come away with a 7-10-point victory. But this year, offense has picked up. I was worried about the offensive line, like I know Coach Summerall talked a lot about going into the year, that the offensive line, losing some players there. They seem to play better. And like you said, Gunnar Watson is playing really well these last few weeks, almost threw for 400 yards against Texas State. And then, hey, you got to worry about Kamani Vidal, too, because when he just rushes for 50 yards, they're almost unbeatable with the Trojans and what they've done offensively.
Yeah, they had to replace the center, right? That was the big one, but they had to replace some other guys as well. And so that's the one unit that really has to play together, right? The running backs, don't necessarily complement each other. Maybe the wide receivers complement each other, and the defensive guys defensive line got to be all on the same page, maybe the corners. But if one guy screws up in the offensive line, that's a problem, right? And then the quarterback is on his back or the running back gets stuffed. That's the one unit that has to know what everybody else is doing, and that takes time, right? That's not something – I don't think you come out of camp like that. You hope you do, but I think that takes time as well, and I think that part of Troy's game has improved as well.
Yeah, and then wide receiver. I think maybe not talked a lot. Jabri Barber is their leading receiver, and that's he played for Dothan, so very familiar. The audience is at least with Jabri Barber and Chris Lewis. I guess it feels like every week he's one hand catching something, and then even Deshaun Stoudemire and Devontae Ross. So they've got. I think they're a better team at that spot than they were last year. Would you agree?
Well, Barber certainly had a ball game this last time out, right? 10 catches, 160 yards. Like you said, Lewis always seems to catch like four balls for like 90 yards and a touchdown or two, plus a Hail Mary thrown in there. I think they're better. I think they're not going back and forth between quarterbacks, so that's got to help everybody from the offensive line to the wide receivers, right? And it's got to be so much more comfortable for Gunner knowing if I do make a mistake, slough it off and come back and don't make the same mistake twice. And he's been really good. Certainly better than I expected this season.
Yeah, so it's going to be an interesting game. I know you pretty much told us you think Troy's going to win. Do you have a score prediction on that?
I'll go 31-14. I don't think it's going to be close. I really don't.
And that kind of feels like the score.
I'm all over the 5.5.
Yeah, and that feels like the score that Troy's had a lot lately too. Like they're kind of close in the first half. They still have some red zone issues, I think, kicking field goals and not capitalizing on some situations there. But then it's always seems like in the second half, Troy will extend the lead and put the game away.
Yeah, it'll be if South is in this ball game, I think it'll be on the offensive side of the ball. Somehow they have figured out what to do with Troy. But we'll see. It's a short week, and Carter Bradley's banged up a little bit, so.
Before I let you go, go back to the Louisiana Raging Cajuns. They are sitting at 5-3 overall, 2-2 behind Troy, one of the many teams that are 2-2 in the Sun Belt West. And this is a team that they beat Texas State a few weeks ago, 34-30. Last week we talked about they beat South Alabama 33-20, and of course in a few weeks they will play against the Trojans. Just where this team is at right now as we kind of hit that stretch run of the season.
Well, they're playing with the backup quarterback themselves, Zeon Chris. He continues to improve. I presume he'll stay there, depending, whether Ben Wooldridge comes back healthy or not. I think they're going to ride or die with Zeon Chris. This team has gotten better every week. Like the defensive line gets better, the offensive line gets better. The wide receivers had an off week against Georgia State, and then they're making all kinds of contested catches against the Jaguars. The Cajuns are basically right where they want to be. They can't stub their toe against Arkansas State. Arkansas State's another team. They lost like 110-3 in their first two ball games, and they're actually in the Sun Belt race. They need some help because they've lost to Troy, I believe. But, yeah, you mentioned that. So they're going to need some help somewhere along the way, but they could get it from the Cajuns, right? If Arkansas State beats the Cajuns and the Cajuns beat Troy, they'll get a little bit of help. I think the Cajuns are in a good spot. They just can't stub their toe against Arkansas State. They're a big 9.5-point favorite. They should win the ball game. Arkansas State's getting great production from Jalen Rayner, the true freshman. You don't see that very often. They need to make him beat them instead of the running game, make him throw the ball. I think the Cajuns win this one, but this is a great definition of a win and move on. I don't care what it looks like. They don't need style points. They just got to get out of Jonesboro, which is a great title for a country song. Got to get out of Jonesboro and with a victory. And then you get Southern Miss on a short week, and then you get a couple extra days to prepare for Troy.
Yeah, that one is going to be a big one, the next to last week of the regular season. And I said that was the last question. This is the official last question. We talked about James Madison, the start. That's over in the East. So I want to get you right now as we go in, 4 weeks left, as we look ahead. Georgia Southern's would be the next team, 3-1. Then you've got Georgia State, Coastal, Old Dominion, and App State with all 2 conference losses apiece. Who do you like to come out of the East?
Well, you have to give the lead right now to Georgia Southern, right? Mm-hmm. Their only loss is to JMU in the Sun Belt. They beat Georgia State. I'm doing that by de facto. I don't know. Again, I think Troy is the best team in the division, so I would probably pick Troy, but I wouldn't be shocked if the Cajuns went into Troy and beat them. But that's still, like you said, a couple of weeks away. Who knows who's going to be healthy at that point in time, and who knows if somebody doesn't trip up along the way. But Georgia right now, the de facto has to go to Georgia Southern. Although, again, watch out for ODU. They got a ridiculous schedule. They're a game behind, but they still play. They get Coastal at home this week. Then they play Liberty, which doesn't matter outside of Liberty. And then they finish up with Georgia Southern and Georgia State. So, as they say, ODU still controls their own destiny, right? If they win out in the Sun Belt, they'll win the division. Same with Georgia Southern. I presume Georgia State needs some help. So I feel like Georgia Southern, let's see if ODU can surprise Coastal Carolina, and then they're right in the middle of that Sun Belt East Pack. That would be the surprise of the season. Not Troy, not JMU, not South Alabama. But if ODU has a chance to win the East with 2 weeks left, that would be the biggest surprise of the season.
Yeah, they played really well against James Madison this past Saturday. I was watching some of that game.
They did.
That was a good game. Came down to the very end, so they're playing well. And it looks like a lot of these teams in the South playing well. I mean, you've got a lot of the division races are very close. I mean, pretty much Marshall's out of it in the East. I mean, they're 1-3. I mean, I would, and then Monroe and Southern Miss are bad. They're both winless. They're both 0-5 on the other side. But outside of that, the rest of the conference is pretty solid. So,
yeah, Arkansas State's in it, right? Yep. Arkansas State's in it in the West. So, yep.
Oh, Butch Jones. He was always the gift that kept giving when he was at Tennessee. But anyways, David, it's going to be a lot of fun how this race ends up with the Sun Belt, how the game ends up on Thursday night. A lot of people around here, I hope you're exactly correct on the Trojans taking a somewhat easy victory over South Alabama. But if the listeners and viewers want to check you out, where can they find you and all the work you're doing?
Well, you can listen to 103.3 The GOAT. That's the radio station. Schultzcast is the Lockdown. I'm on Twitter at Schultzcast, or you can download Lockdown Sunbelt. You can subscribe on YouTube. Appreciate it. Phillip, real quickly, if Alabama can keep that game in the 20s, the Tide have a chance. If that ball game gets into the 30s or 40s, it's going to be LSU.
I agree with you 100%, and I'm still torn on where I'm going with it, and the audience is going to have to wait until Friday's podcast to find out.
There you go.
But anyways, David, I appreciate you coming on the show, and I look forward to doing this again sometime.
Thanks, Phillip. Always appreciate joining you.
All right, and once again, thanks to David Schultz for coming on today's edition of the show. Now, that's going to do it for the show today. Remember, you can follow me on social media at PJordanSEC. Podcast is available on all your favorite podcast platforms, including go over to WiregrassDailyNews.com. We're on the Wiregrass Daily News Facebook page today as well. So if you leave any comments on those, we'll talk about that on some future editions of the show. Now, tomorrow on Friday, be joined by Matt Lowe from FieldLevelMedia.com, where we will look ahead for the football weekend. Big games in college football and the SEC. We will be previewing Alabama and LSU and some other big games and some games involving Southeast teams in the NFL, the Atlanta Falcons, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the New Orleans Saints, teams like that. So we'll be breaking it all down on Friday's episode. So I hope you will check that out. I hope everybody has a great Thursday. Remember, the Dothan Wolves will be playing in their regular season finale. Now, the playoffs are coming next week, but the regular season finale tonight, Thursday night, they will be playing Jack High School. 6:45 is when pregame starts, and kickoff is at 7, 96.9 The Legend. Check it out on radio. Check it out on the app. Jerry Coleman, Ken Lambert, and myself will be giving you all the coverage tonight. They'll be calling the game. I'll be keeping you up to date on all things going on around the Wiregrass. Hope everybody has a great Thursday. We'll talk to you Friday. Bye-bye.